within Bhutan, I would say that entrepreneurship is now growing. It's a buzzing topic. There's a lot of other offices and stakeholders who are coming in, trying to understand entrepreneurship, trying to understand what our youths would be interested in.
BCG just projected Bangladesh to become $1 trillion economy. PwC has projected that by 2030 and by 2060, India is going to be bigger than the US. That's something, right? We talk about regional blocks, but I think South Asia as a block is definitely very, very powerful.
Hi, everyone. A very, very warm welcome. As you can see, this is our third time around, and we're very excited to have you all join us on what I believe will be a super exciting debate. Please do join us in large numbers. Invite some more of your friends. This is being streamed on LinkedIn Live as well. A reminder to please put your questions in the Q&A box that you will see, and the panelists will take, or should I say the debaters, will take questions along the way. For more details about our work, you can look in the chat window. Do not want to spend too much time talking through all of those details at this point, but want to very quickly hand it over to Omar, who is our facilitator, Sutradhar, for today, holding this debate together. Omar, over to you to take the session away.
Thank you, Suchi. It's great to be here facilitating what promises to be a very interesting discussion / debate about venture studios. So venture studios have emerged as a very innovative and intriguing model for building and scaling startups. They offer a unique approach that combines the strategic thinking of a corporate incubator with the agility and risk-taking of a venture capital firm. So our point of contention today is, are venture studios the way to go for a developing set of economies like South Asia? Today, we have some amazing debaters with us. Chalinda Abeykoon from nVentures in Sri Lanka, Gigi Mathews, who's a venture builder at Enviu in India, Minhaz Anwar from Better Stories in Bangladesh, and myself, Omar Abedin from PTH Venture Studio in Karachi and Dubai. So before I hand over to Chalinda to do an introduction, there is some confusion often that comes up in the definition of venture studio. So there is a spectrum of different types of support organizations that are covered by the term venture studio. On the one hand, you have corporate venture builders like Enviu, and we're going to hear from Gigi today in detail about how corporate venture builders work and how they actually add value and help startups to scale up. And then on the absolute other end of the spectrum, you have personal venture studios like PTH, where basically we help startups that already exist. We don't create our own startups. So in this spectrum, you will find companies building products, hiring CEOs, spinning off those products. So they'll do things like product development, they'll do marketing, they'll do team building, they'll do the full gamut of activities. On the end of the spectrum where PTH sits, we act as a support mechanism to existing startups. And so we focus on certain things that are really important to us. The first and most important thing is the founder themselves. What is their background? What is their passion? Why are they doing this? What mission are they on? What problem are they solving? How committed are they to solving that problem? Everything else, the business model, the direction of the company. All of these things can pivot and change over time, but the founder, their fundamentals don't really change. So having said all that, now that you understand that there's a spectrum of different types of entities on the venture builder scale, I would like to ask Chalinda to introduce himself and tell us about the work he's doing with nVentures. Chalinda, over to you.
Thanks, Omar. It's great to be here. Good evening and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Chalinda. I'm the managing partner for nVentures. We are a venture capital fund domiciled in Singapore, and we invest in primarily early stage. So when I say early stage, just like there's multiple definitions for venture studios, everybody has their own definition for early stage. So we typically take part in pre-seed and seed. What that means is we even invest in just an idea on a presentation as well at some point, and primarily focusing on the B2B fintech segment. We invest across South Asia and Southeast Asia, so Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, India. We looked at Pakistan, and then in the emerging Southeast Asian markets. And what we've done is between Singapore and Sri Lanka, we've built sort of like a corridor or a bridge that essentially connects South Asia with Southeast Asia. So this allows investors in the region to cross-invest as well as startups to explore other markets as well. We've done about 14 investments in the last 24 months. We've had one exit, but prior to this, I've been in the startup ecosystem space for about 15 years now, helped build and scale 50 plus companies across the region, essentially. So happy to be part of this. And with that, I will pass it on to Minhaz. Bye.
Thank you, Chalinda. I hope you can all hear me right. Apologizing for my broken voice a bit. So my name is Minhaz Anwar, and I'm the founder and chief storyteller at Better Stories Limited. We call ourselves more of a social movement. Since we began our journey in around 2008-9, until now, we have delivered about 21 accelerators. We have touched in one way or the other about 1,000 entrepreneurs, which includes startups and small, medium enterprises. We have also figured that for Bangladesh, as it becomes a developed economy by 2041 or 40s, we need to do more. So we are now future-proofing non-government organizations, SMEs, and startups, primarily by helping them become better leaders, better fundraisers, better influencers. I'll stop here, and I'm sure there will be a lot more to discuss. So handing it over to Gigi Mathews.
Sorry. Thank you, Minhaz. I'm sorry my camera was off. I have a little bit of a situation with my connectivity. So I'm going to say a quick hi. The rain is spoiling my connectivity, but I'm going to switch off video, but I'm going to talk. I am Gigi Mathews, and I'm from Enviu. I'm the Regional Director of Partnerships, and great to be at the ANDE South Asia Convening. You know, anything ANDE is always my favorite place to be. And of course, it's awesome for me to share the panel with Omar, Chalinda, and Minhaz. So what does Enviu do? So Enviu is a venture building studio, and quickly a little about it. We're headquartered in the Netherlands, and we've got a presence in South Asia, as in India and Bangladesh, East Africa, Kenya, and Indonesia. And I'd like to tell you a little bit, and to also start what we call the mighty debate, right? As Omar put it. So I would like to start by saying that for us at Enviu, our venture building studio model hasn't just been like a factory of innovation, right? But I believe it's also a laboratory for systemic change. I've seen it for the last 5 years being in Enviu. So we've taken this model, that is a venture building model, beyond the aspect of rapid prototyping and disruptive startups. For us, it is to solve deep-rooted social and environmental challenges. So over the last 20 years, Enviu has worked to prove that we as a venture building studio can be a powerful mechanism, and of course, to create scalable, sustainable impact ventures. I mean, that's the core of what we do. How do we do this? We have a methodology, which I believe, of course, we have aced, of course, incorporating learnings along the way, right? Over the last 20 years, this methodology has been very key for us. So we start with the issue analysis, from which we ideate and validate multiple potential system changing models, which we call our pilots, which then we spin off into sustainable ventures. So for us, it's not just about building ventures. It's about building systems that work for, of course, people and planet. So whether it's addressing textile waste in India, post-harvest food loss in Kenya, I mean, the problem of single-use plastics in Indonesia, we've reimagined entrepreneurship. So for us, it is to tackle the world's most pressing issues. And we believe that entrepreneurship is key. So why venture building studios? And why are they critical for impact ventures in South Asia? So I'm sure I don't have to give you a lecture on this. All of us in the room know that impact ventures are fundamentally different from traditional startups, right? I'm sure you agree. So regular ventures operate within existing systems designed to support them over the years. We've seen that. But in contrast, impact ventures seek to disrupt or redesign broken systems. So whether you're addressing environmental degradation or social inequities, the work is more complex. It's pioneering to a large extent. So that means it requires more awareness, patience. I mean, we've heard that a lot building impact ventures, right? And we need support. And also we need a lot more time or a significant more time to succeed. So why do we think that South Asia is particularly suited for this approach? I mean, we know the region faces significant systemic challenges, right? From waste management to livelihood creation. But one thing we all will have to agree, that it has a very strong entrepreneurship spirit. And of course, look at our localized innovations. I mean, these innovations can be scaled if it has the right support, right? So at Enviu in South Asia, we're working towards building a strong and robust venture building studio because we want to bridge this gap by combining global expertise with local insights. So we are ensuring that our solutions are not only impactful, but also deeply contextualized. I mean, we've seen this approach work firsthand. For example, in India, our work tackling textile waste is just not about recycling. I mean, it's about creating a circular economy that connects waste pickers, processing facilities, and of course, markets, right? End markets. I mean, a strong example to quote with the work that we do in Enviu lies in our work with the Samyuka Shakti program. This wouldn't be possible without the ecosystem building power of the venture building studio model. So I would like to endorse this insight, right? Before I, give the discussion back. South Asia is not only ready for the venture building studio model. I believe it needs it. I mean, the challenges of the region demand a systematic, tailored, and impact-driven approach that I believe a venture building studio can provide. I mean, for us, it's just not about building businesses. I mean, I've seen it, and we at Enviu believe it's about transforming systems and, of course, empowering entrepreneurs. With this, Omar, I'm going to hand it over to you. While I'm talking from a venture building studio point of view, do tell us about the venture studio model.
Thank you, Gigi. I love the work that you guys are doing, and it's fascinating to see how big corporate can actually drive innovation because it's not intuitive. We've seen traditional corporate venture efforts fail, even in North America, simply because the mindset that traditional large corporates bring is very different than the mindset of a startup, of any startup, pretty much. So now let's take it to the other end of the spectrum and talk about what we do at PTH and similar venture studios. So our focus, as I mentioned earlier, is on finding amazing founders that have a mission, that have a purpose, that are, so there is an element of impact there, right? At least for me, I would much prefer to work with someone who's solving a problem that impacts the lives of 1 billion people across Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Latin America, than someone who is solving a problem for a very small, very wealthy elite community within one of our countries. Because let's face it, South Asia has wealthy elites as well. The percentages are small. You know, you're talking about 5% here and 7% there and 8% there. But when you look at it in absolute numbers, 5% of 250 million is still 12.5 million people, right? So it is a business that can be done. But for me, the far greater attraction comes from finding those founders who are trying to create impact, to create sustainable change. And that can be in any field, right? So we are sector agnostic. We really don't, we're not hung up on, oh, we're focusing only on education or only on health or only on data or whatever it might be. And we are geography agnostic. So there is no shortage of amazing founders that exists across the globe. So we are now working with founders in 6 different countries, simply because of the kind of support that we provide and the kind of business model that we have. We've been at it for quite a while, right? It's been 3 or 4 years. It's been a very challenging 4 years because we have as yet not raised a fund to support the venture studio. So in an ideal world, the model actually looks like venture studio plus VC fund, right? So the VC fund actually is there to support companies in the studio with funding as and when required to help them to scale up. Conditions being what they are, global fundraising has been extremely challenging. And then when you multiply that with the challenges faced by emerging markets, which are, you know, they're just worse. They're just worse than everything facing North American fundraising efforts, or let's say even European fundraising efforts. The challenges that the 4 of us would face on a daily basis in terms of fundraising are just greater because we are in emerging markets. And so first you have to explain the market, then you have to explain the opportunity, then you have to explain the founder, then you have to explain how funds are going to get repatriated. There's just a series of challenges that have to be overcome. But in an ideal world, if we are able to create this kind of support where there's one side that is building the entity, actually working with founders to help them to scale that entity, and the other side is investing as required. So, you know, coming in at pre-seed, coming in at seed stage, maybe doubling down as you move towards the Series A. You know, that model to me is something that is exceptionally useful in a market like South Asia, where access to funds is, if you talk, I've talked to 1,000 founders in the last 3 years, literally 1,000 founders. And their single biggest bugaboo, their single biggest problem is, how do I get funding? I'm at the point where now I cannot move forward. I've bootstrapped for 1 year. I'm at that point where I need funding. I cannot get funding. So, you know, if we can crack that for them, I think the venture studio plus VC fund model is a very powerful one. Now, I think this is the perfect time to bring in Chalinda because he runs a VC fund. Chalinda, what are your views on this topic?
Super. So I think just to kind of elaborate on the challenges that we face, right? Especially if you take countries like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, the question is, where do great ideas come from? The best ideas actually come from tier 2, tier 3 cities, right? That's where you find a large, Omar, to quote you, that billion will impact 1 billion people. And why is fundraising hard is because if you look at a traditional fundraising life cycle, your pre-seed and sometimes your seed stage funding typically comes from friends and family. But if you look at founders who are coming from, you know, tier 2, tier 3 cities, they don't have friends and family who can write that $50,000 check, right? You know, when we started, and when I started 15 years ago, and when I say, oh, you know what, I want to start a company, the culture was that, okay, you were not smart enough to get a job, hence you're starting your own business, right? So it was a very negative. Luckily, those cultural things have changed and it's improved. So that's why fundraising is super, super hard. What we've seen in the past is, like correctly, Omar, you mentioned people would start a venture studio or they would start an accelerator. They'll get that whole thing ball rolling, and then eventually they go and raise a fund. Now, raising a fund is still difficult. So what we did was we did the complete reverse. We did the hard thing first, the harder thing, which was to raise a fund. Now, raising a fund, when you're from an emerging markets, which has been battered by so many black swan events, especially Sri Lanka stands out among the 4-5 South Asian countries. And then, you haven't gone to an Ivy League. You don't have a surname that's been marinated for generation or been colonized. And you're not been part of a McKinsey or a Goldman, right? So fundraising becomes even more harder. So we started with that, and now we have some traction. We have data, and what we've been able to do is, at this point, because the fund is there, we can now get into a venture studio or an accelerator. Then the buying power is a lot more higher because we have some success stories. And I think that's the strategy that has worked for us. I've seen, and I've been part of so many other teams where we tried the other way around. It is super hard because ultimately, even if you're running a studio, you find a good team, you did a great product. I think the main challenge right now across the world, it's not the product development side, because technology has become so much easier. Product development is super easy. What's really hard is sales and marketing, especially in the B2B space. You need people to go and do that sale, and that's a skill that you acquire when you've been in business for a while. So if you want to get a person who has 10 years of sales experience or pre-sales, that person is going to cost, which is where the fund essentially comes in. So what I'm seeing is you need to have some form of way. I think the corporate venture studio model has taken off to a certain extent, but then a lot of internal politics get in the way. I think what really stops innovation in some of these things is those internal politics, and then the venture is essentially ends up becoming a cost center. But I think at the same time, the big difference that I'm seeing, especially in our region, is, and I think India went through this cycle in the early 90s where you had people coming back. Those who left India, they spent 20, 30 years in US, in North America, they started coming back. And I'm seeing the same thing happening in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, and in Sri Lanka. So yes, there are so many people leaving the country, but at the same time, you have a good chunk of people coming back. And that is where I feel the venture studio model kind of comes into play, because that's where they can add value beyond the whole product side of things. So funding has to get sorted out. What's your strategy around that? That's a whole nother can of worms. But I think in the next couple of years, I'm seeing even in Bangladesh, there's a lot of emphasis from the government. There's a lot of independent funds that are smaller funds that are coming in, and they will essentially drive some of these things. Ultimately, you need a poster child. You need one big exit, one big acquisition. A couple of months ago here in Sri Lanka, we had WSO2, which was acquired for about 600 million by EQT. So you need a few of those things happening, and that's going to create that wave that you need.
Awesome. Minhaz bhai, I know you have some reservations about the venture studio model and how it may or may not apply in South Asia. So please jump in.
Interesting is that we are all agreeing on one point, which is, I think, funding being the single most important challenge for across the board, whether the startups or the accelerators or the venture studio builders. So I think that's exactly also my point, right? The fact that the macro environment around us is not necessarily one that is conducive enough right at this moment to have the luxury of, models like venture studios. There are bigger things at play that needs to be sorted out first, in my humble opinion. If you look at the global distribution of venture studios, you would see half of it is in US, one fourth being in California, and another one fourth in rest of it. And then the rest of the world has another half. It's not a lot in numbers in totality. It's something that is catching up. But I think our part of the world needs a little bit different kind of prioritization, because I think Chalinda has alluded to Black Swan events, and I think Bangladesh is also privy to few. And we also need the government, for example, in our part of the world, to take this seriously, not just do the lip services, not just to allocate some symbolic amount of money, but to make sure the investors come and are confident in investing in our part of the world. What is the point of having, a couple of founders in our studios and then starving for funding? They can't just grow. I mean, as ecosystem builders or facilitators, we have the responsibility that whoever, founders we're bringing into our fold, we are making sure they have all the right kind of supports, available for them. And we are not just shutting ourselves down just because the overall environment isn't somewhat supporting us, right? So if you look at, the number of investment that has happened in our part of the world, particularly, I will exclude India for that, statistics, but for rest of the countries in South Asia, and individually the number of, let's say, occasions that they have raised money, you would see a majority of the funding has been raised from outside of the region, not necessarily from within, right? So things that we need to focus on are slightly different. Chalinda has rightly mentioned product development isn't as difficult, but I think if you look at the market, for example, I would say there are things like, internet connectivity, things like devices being available. Can a venture studio resolve that? No way. It needs the governments, the regulatory, and the politicians to make sure, those things happen. We can all ask for it, but those, infrastructural challenges need to be resolved. So therefore, I'm not necessarily against the idea of having it, but I'm just, saying for us to be successful, we surely need to look at the macro factors that makes it possible. And the other thing that I have experienced by working with, quite a good number of founders in our part of the world, sometimes we assume that they're coming ready for venture studio or for accelerator. Oftentimes we have to go back to almost ground zero, and we have to start from things that would perhaps be more, leveled as education program, right? So then we looked back and saw that, how maybe our higher education institutions in general are not necessarily doing the best of the services to these people. So we have to fix those things. So my humble proposition is, let's work together and work on the necessary preconditions, as a priority basis. And of course, we are doing important work as accelerators and venture studios and investors in our markets. But our markets have got own limitations, which makes it difficult to deliver our side of the job. And therefore, we need more support from the government. We need more support from other components of the ecosystem. So that's my humble proposition. I'd like to pass it on to Gigi. You might have some interesting perspectives, and please feel free to disagree with me. Over to you, Gigi.
Thank you, Minhaz. Great insights there. I would like to state that, the venture building studio model isn't a, one size fits all approach. So, it's not a magic formula, right? So it definitely comes with its challenges. I mean, especially in a region as complex and diverse as South Asia, right? So at Enviu, we've had our share of fair failures along with our successes. But one thing I can confidently say that those failures have been some of our greatest teachers. I mean, today we call ourselves experts in this, and I think it's because of the failures we've had and we've learned. So over the last, past 2 decades, that's how old we are, 20 years. We've built 24 ventures. Of course, every single one of them has been shaped with what we call lean learning, lean validation. I mean, these terms are not new for anyone building, impact ventures especially. And this means we quickly test, learn, and adapt. Sometimes some of our ventures, we pivot entirely if something doesn't work. It's important to fail fast. I mean, this has been extremely, extremely important for us to fail fast. So it's in all this process and, which has been allowing us to refine our approach and work on building a methodology that I spoke about, right? So this methodology works, and especially in regions like South Asia. So, so for us, what makes building impact enterprises particularly challenging? I mean, the stats show that it's 3 times as hard as building regular enterprises, right? And this is because of the triple bottom line. We all know, unlike traditional startups, impact-driven enterprises must balance profit with creating value for people and planet. I mean, that's the base of it all. So why does the venture building studio model work for South Asia? So we all know South Asia is an incredibly diverse, South Asia is an incredibly diverse region, and creating an enabling ecosystem is key to success here. So unlike traditional startups, building impact-driven ventures requires collaboration. I mean, just now Minhaz was talking about, right? We need that. It requires collaboration with governments, industries, corporates, investors. I mean, each of whom work on vastly different timelines and speak a different language. So we've noticed that when we build our ventures programmatically. For example, governments may take 5 years to pass a legislation. Corporates have a 3 to 5 year planning cycles with 6-month decision-making periods. And of course, as an entrepreneur who's building a venture, you face the immediacy of funding and investment pressures. So as a venture building studio, Enviu has a systemic approach that accounts for these complexities. So we intentionally build ecosystems where ventures can thrive. So this creates a foundation that brings all these stakeholders together. The level of intent, this level of intention makes an enormous difference. So it's just not about launching a business, right? It's about ensuring the environment around that business supports its success. So, I'd like to share some quick learnings from our venture building studio model, right? Number 1, financial sustainability is non-negotiable. Profit and impact must go hand in hand. You cannot prioritize one over the other. 2, fail fast, of course. Learn and pivot quickly, right? I mean, we say this, fail fast and don't be afraid to kill your darlings. Just because something seems promising on paper doesn't mean you have to go on with it, right? And this has been one of our biggest learnings. The other important thing, very important for us, is partnerships. Partnerships is key. We have a mantra and it's called together is more. We cannot do it alone. We have funding partners, we have, investment partners, we have knowledge partners, we have execution partners. So at Enviu, partnerships are central to everything we do. So anyway, at this point, I'd like to, have Omar come in here and share more why this approach is not just relevant, but vital for a region like South Asia. The floor to you, Omar.
Thanks, Gigi. So I second pretty much everything that you're saying, especially about the importance of failing fast. I've actually literally just done a series of 1-minute videos on what is failing fast and why is it such a problem in South Asia, because the word fail means something so negative in our culture. You have visions of mothers killing themselves, fathers, beating their children. You failed, like it's such a negative connotation. And, you have to explain to them what that actually means. It's a completely different mindset. It means, use that as a teacher, right? Use every little failure as a teacher to get it better and better and better and better and better. And eventually you will reach your goal. But it's a very, very different mindset in South Asia than anywhere else, I think, in the world. Although I do believe that Latin America and Africa have the same view of failure. Everywhere that our British overlords stayed over time. This concept of failure has kind of seeped through the generations. But to address some of the points that Minhaz bhai made, there's actually what he was saying in terms of some startups not even being ready to join an accelerator. Forget about a scale-up opportunity like YC, or forget about, so 99 point something % of founders that I have spoken to believe they're ready for funding. But actually, when you start talking to them, it takes you 5 minutes to understand that probably 80% of them are not ready for funding, right? They're just not, and they don't know what they don't know. So that's where the role of venture studios like PTH comes in. We actually help them to get ready for funding. And sometimes that takes 6 months, sometimes it takes a year. The second thing that we are, that we actually add value in is that we are working with them. We are not giving them advice. We're actually doing it, right? So I'm a fractional CMO in 6 startups. I've been, I was a marketing director at Kareem. Chalinda mentioned watershed moments. Kareem's acquisition by Uber of 3.1 billion was, has still not been repeated in the region, right? Since 2019, it's been 5 years. Yeah, sure, we had 3 years of COVID and all that drama that went with it, but still, it has not been repeated, which is quite something given how much inflation has really impacted all of us, right? Something like that should have happened by now. So I'm able to, directly work with those teams. In some cases, I've actually set up marketing organizations in Pakistan to support startups in Dubai. Why? Because the cost of doing that in Pakistan in dollar terms is a lot cheaper than doing it in Dubai, right? Working on go-to-market strategy. Most people have, 1 or 2 things in their minds when they think about GTM. But actually go-to-market means, as you all know, it's a vast array of options that are available to the founder, and it needs to be developed and tailored for every single startup. There is no GTM manual that says, chapter 1, do this, chapter 2, do this, chapter 3. There's nothing like that, right? It needs to be done specifically for each startup. Then you talk about investments, right? And fundraising. We recently had one of our startups meet with some success in Shark Tank Pakistan, which is, the new Shark Tank franchise has just launched in Pakistan. So they raised some funds there. I was actually one of the people in the back room. When the founders walk out and go into the back, they talk to their advisor. I was the guy in the back talking to them, and I actually advised them to take a deal, which on the face of it was not very attractive from a typical venture standpoint, right? But the advice that I gave them actually led them to go ahead and accept that offer. And now, within 4 weeks of that, we have literally this week been negotiating that term sheet and helping them through all of those challenges as well, right? So that advice, that ability to actually guide the startup through these challenges, through these difficulties, is not available in South Asia as a general role. Because accelerators, most accelerators are run by the government, especially in Pakistan, right? Government accelerators by law cannot give you advice. They can give you training, they can give you, mentoring, they can connect you to advisors, but they can't give you advice because, God forbid, if the advice backfires or you don't implement it well and it goes backwards, somebody will turn around and sue the government for giving you bad advice. So that's why I actually used to run the National Incubation Center in Karachi, which had over 500 startups incubated there over the last 3-4 years, right? So that's why I started a venture studio, because the necessity of providing tailored and specific roadmaps and guidance and work support to startups was the thing that was actually burning inside of me. This is a problem. Like, they're not getting the advice that they need. They're not getting the help that they need. So we use our investor networks. I mean, Chalinda has been on several calls with some of my startups. He's been very kind to, give feedback and so on, because, that advice and that mentoring and that connectivity is essential. So that's why I would argue that venture studios can play, if done properly, can play an important role in helping startups to get ready for funding and then to deploy that funding successfully. Because otherwise, what happens? You see somebody going out and buying an apartment, you see somebody going out and buying a Toyota Corolla or a Honda Civic. Like, dude, that's not why you got this money, right? This is a fiduciary responsibility that you have, right? So providing that ongoing kind of hand holding and mentoring and advice. This is not to say that what Minhaz bhai said about government regulations is not important. It's absolutely critical. There are 12 VC firms in Pakistan. I think 10 of them are domiciled outside the country for exactly this reason. Because the regulations are so onerous and so cumbersome, and the reporting requirements are so difficult, that most people just say, I'm going to be domiciled like Chalinda in Singapore or ADGM or DIFC or, the UK or in the US, Delaware, right? So my request to the government would be, if you can't create a positive environment, like, give tax reliefs and tax breaks, tax incentives, at least stop creating hurdles. Just stop creating roadblocks. Stop throwing roadblocks into the works every couple of days. All of a sudden, some regulation will come up. There has been progress. I know it's been a little bit patchy, and you see one step forward and then you see 3 steps back, but there has been some progress. But there's so much more work to be done in that arena. And I think people like us, we need to be getting in front of the government more and more, because we have direct feedback from the startups and the ecosystem enablers, right? We can help them, but the challenge is, are they willing to listen?
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts, lady and gentlemen, on the topic, or shall we open it up for Q&A? Because I see a question already coming in.
Let's get into Q&A, I think.
Okay, so there's a question for Minhaz bhai. The private sector is typically balked at engaging with governments in this part of the world, probably for good reason. What might be ways in which we can indeed influence the policies and infrastructure that he alluded to?
Well, I wish I had the magic answer. Right. So I think it's primarily the confidence in the system, right? I mean, and also it's a classic case of where the private sector needs to answer to the question, what's in it for me? I think the way things work in our part of the world often aren't ideal, and therefore people go, at tangent to find and figure out their ways. So I think for Bangladesh in particular, I'm optimistic. Of course, things are changing. The investment front office of Bangladesh government, which is known as BIDA, has just got a very competent head of the organization who has been hired straight from HSBC Singapore. And that gentleman has been changing the way that government office operates and communicates. So and then for last couple of months, every month since he joined, he has been doing at least one public event monthly to answer any questions that public, the private sector, the investor, whoever has got any questions, any complaints. I think that openness has been starting to show results. It wasn't there for last, let's say, 5, 10, 15 years. So I think there has to be, the right kind of approach to building, relationships between private sector and the government. And government has the responsibility to open the door. I'm sure private sector in their boardrooms have been privy to few. Oftentimes, investing in, let's say, corporate accelerators or, in startups have been very contentious because the odds of success is very difficult one to convince all the board members. So oftentimes things what Gigi mentioned, the impact and the soft side are brought to the table to justify those investments. But I personally believe, the private sector can do a lot more. And if they can look at very long term, it's in their best interest that they invest in innovation, that they invest in founders, they invest in ideas that takes them to future, certainly. However, I think there are also short-term pressure for private sector organizations to make profits and give dividends to their shareholders. So there is always this tension between these two, and therefore, I think the government needs to look at how might they encourage more, how might they make it easier by maybe looking at not just only tax breaks, but also, incentivizing in general the idea of working with innovators, working with universities, working with founders and ideas for the future. And I think the way the government of Bangladesh in particular has just started to doing it, I think there is a lot of promises, and I see, that going a long way.
Excellent. There's a couple more questions in the chat.
Sorry, Omar, just to,
yeah.
if I may add two things for that question. For anybody who's listening this, the most important thing that I will say is learn game theory. Whether you're an entrepreneur or an investor, spend some time really understanding game theory, because I think from a South Asian cultural standpoint, game theory is very, very important, because when you're doing some of these, whether it's a venture studio or as an investor or as an entrepreneur, you need to strive for a win-win situation. But one thing I've noticed over the years, and this is, again, it's a regional this thing, the win-win situation, if let's say Omar and I are doing a deal, if I feel that Omar is winning more than me, even though I have a win as well, I consider it as a loss. So this I again, probably through colonization or whatever, I'm not a history buff or anything, but I think that side is very important. So the second thing is, with regards to the private sector, what I've also seen is, in the region, our economies for the longest part grew based on labor arbitrage. So if you look at the private sector, the larger private sector organizations are in industries and businesses which depends on having large workforce, right? And now this has been impacted by entrepreneurs, because nobody wants to be part of a small cog in a big machine. They want to go and build their own companies. And this is why the corporate venture models are struggling in this part of the world, because even when a corporate invests, they want the startup to help improve their bottom line. Now, that's not the objective of the startup. The startup's objective is to become a scale up and then become a large company. If you're a corporate, you need to figure out how do you improve your bottom line on your own. So relying too much on private sector, and I've gone through this. I worked for government, the first half of my career, I worked for government, then I worked for private sector. For me, it's one and the same. The only thing difference is the way they dress. Usually government servants tend to wear their national dress, whereas the corporates wear the suits, right? The way that we've done now is, that's why it's, domiciling in Singapore and all of these things come, because now when the exits happen, when the successes come, yes, we do get a benefit out of it, but it is recognized in Singapore. Then everybody gets activated saying, hey, why didn't you, do this company here? Or why didn't you raise money from, local investors? So the local investors are now getting, so it's always easy to create demand, as opposed to go and tell these people there is this opportunity and try to paint the future. It's very, very hard, but it's easier to do it the other way around and show that you're missing out. FOMO is a very, very powerful feeling, and then people are coming back.
The only challenge there is that in Pakistan, for example, if you can get 22% return on your savings account.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who the hell is going to put money into a venture, right? That's
100%.
That's just a reality, right? Okay, a couple more questions. How do you decide the ownership of the venture in a venture studio? Do you own the majority or the co-founder? The same formula applies to all companies. I think this is a question for me or Gigi. From my side, there is no fixed formula for ownership. We are a very small minority shareholder. It's always single digits. And the idea is not to become a pain on your cap table, but to become a value-adding advisor plus on your cap table. Do the co-founders get paid market salary? So again, Gigi can speak to this from Enviu's point of view. And for me, the co-founder's salary is decided by the investors, usually, especially at the very early stage. It's not a decision taken in isolation by anyone. Even the founder doesn't have the control over their own salary. So Gigi, how do you guys do this in terms of dealing with co-founders?
So, when you rightly introduced me, you said, Gigi, you're the venture builder at Enviu. So at the base end of it, we are all venture builders. We may have different titles, but we're venture builders, which means that
Right.
we are the first co-founders within that particular idea and that venture, right? So, so we handhold these ventures till they're able to spin off into successful, sustainable ventures. So till then, yes, Enviu will have the majority of shares. But once you have the entrepreneurial team on board, I mean, their holding will keep increasing based on it growing into being a sustainable and venture and milestone achieving. Because at the end of the day, Enviu has to exit. I mean, that's our game plan, right? Exit. We're not just building businesses and collecting them. So it's to build the sustainable business, spin it off, let it do its magic, create scale, change the world, and then we start on new ideas. So that's the way we do it. So we are the employees or people within Enviu are the first co-founders within any particular idea that then spins off from a pilot then to being a venture.
Perfect. So I think two final questions. Who are the investors? Is it institutional money? Is it private wealth? And how does a venture studio fund investment and expenses? And then I think there's some very specific questions for me, which is, have you raised funds? Who are investors in your funds, et cetera, et cetera. So that I can take offline. But so for Enviu, who are your investors? Gigi, are you able to answer that?
Yes. So, so the way we do it, right? That's why you'd have heard me saying partnership is key, right? We have funding partners, we have execution partners. So who actually brings in, the money for us in the beginning? So when it's about the issue analysis and the ideation, and then when we pilot, it's grants brought in by like-minded and like-driven partners. For example, we have a program called Closing the Loop on Textile Waste, where we have IKEA Foundation, H&M Foundation, Al-Walid Philanthropies, all who are driven by the same problem that we want to solve within India, to make sure that waste is not waste anymore, but is, can we bring more value to it, meanwhile creating livelihoods, meanwhile creating resilient micro entrepreneurs. So these are who bring the money in, who help us, kickstart with it. But of course, once it is beyond the pilot stage and it goes into being ventures, we have investors coming in. And that, of course, is from mainstream, where, hey, this business idea is good also, right? Yes, it's creating impact, but also it's just like in traditional startups, it also has to have a good business model, to take it to scale. So that's when we bring in, investors, impact investors into the fray. So that's how our model works.
Amazing. I think we're out of time, but I would just like to end with a plea to our governments, which is, for the love of God, please let us travel to each other's countries. For the love of God. I mean, the last time I visited India was in the 90s. It sucks. I can't get a visa to save my life. Doesn't matter what passport I have. I will originally always be from Pakistan, right? So similarly, Bangladesh, I have a lot of emotional family ties with Bangladesh. I have not been able to go since the late 90s. This is criminal. I think the one country out of the four of us that does a good job with welcoming people from other places is actually Sri Lanka. Anyone can visit and anyone is welcome. You can enjoy the tea, you can enjoy the beaches, you can enjoy the elephants, you can enjoy the fruit, you can enjoy, why can we not do this as a Southern Asian bloc? It's a tremendous untapped opportunity. And I would like to end on this prayer
100%.
that all of us can actually visit and spend time with each other and get to know each other's countries and regions and cultures and foods and music and all of that. So thank you all for a very interesting discussion. I hope
Thank you.
our listeners and viewers enjoyed it as well. Suchi, thank you so much for inviting us here.
Not at all.
Thank you so much.
The pleasure is ours. That's a plea from our end as well, Omar. And what I will do is request folks, before you head out, while we're still chatting, a reminder that we have more. Gigi mentioned impact investing. Day after tomorrow, the entire day is talking about impact investing. Please do join us. Feedback here, please. This helps us do what we do better. And Omar, I was going to say, what we're doing or attempting here is our easy workaround to what we would hope would be a more permanent solution, with us being able to travel to each other's countries, etc. I will acknowledge that we have very limited influence, and this is our locus of influence, and that's where we're trying to put this together. So we hope you and others will continue to join us, and that we find ways to work around the situation that we find ourselves in. Thank you once again to all of you. And before you jump off, if I could request the rest of you for some feedback, that would be great. Omar, I will connect you to Abhishek, who had all of those questions. We should definitely be speaking to each other. And Chalinda, if you haven't as well, I shall do that. For anybody else who wants to be put in touch, we've been a relatively small bunch. We're very happy to do that. Please reach out to us. You have our contact details. And we will be very happy to make those connections so you can actually take these conversations forward. So with those few words, thank you again from us at ANDE and all of the co-hosts who have joined us in making the convening happen. To the folks at NAB Bangladesh for co-hosting us, but nVentures, Omar, you and Park Tech Hub, the folks at Isimod, the folks at WUSC in Sri Lanka, and many of our other partners you saw in our introduction video. Thank you to everyone, and catch you on the other side.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Take
much.
care, everyone. Thanks, Omar. Thanks,
Bye.
Suchi. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye,
Minhaz.
guys.
Gigi.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You.